are proud to have here the presence of Troy Duno, who is Director of Mining and Metals at Turner and Townsend. He is based, he's speaking from Las Vegas, Nevada, United States, and he will talk about the high cost of poor closure planning, which is a problem that we are facing in Brazil. We are decommissioning mines and dams here in Brazil, and the bad management is always a threat. So I would like to say welcome to Troy Duno and to introduce our International Director, Felipe Gutierrez. Brazil is the only section to have an international director. Our director is in Houston, Texas, Felipe Gutierrez, who will be the host. Felipe, so it's with you and Troy. Troy, thank you very much on behalf of AC Brazil section. I thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Aldo. And we're not going to spend any more time. We just go ahead and jump into the presentation we're going to have with Troy. As Aldo said, we very graciously accepted the invitation to be with us today. And after the presentation, we're going to have time for questions and answers. So we do ask everybody who is interested and who have any questions to do send them to the YouTube channel. And we'll take them as much as possible, time allowing. So Troy, the mic is with you.
Thank you very much, Felipe. I appreciate it. So just jumping right in, here's a brief summary of what I plan to talk about this evening. So do a quick introduction, talk a little bit about the project life cycle and where we should be looking at planning for closure, how we look at how we can estimate closure better, how we can execute closure projects, and then the overall planning impacts of that. At the end of it, I'll look at a couple of case studies on different closure projects that we've been looking at. As a quick introduction of myself, my name, like they said, Troy Duno. I'm the Director for Mining and Metals for Canada and a little bit for the United States as well. I'm also the global lead for mine closure within Turner and Townsend. I graduated from Boise State University in Boise, Idaho, with a degree in civil engineering and construction, a master's degree from the University of Phoenix, and I've been working in the field for about 25 years. I've been with Turner and Townsend for 10 years, and like I always like to say, I'm a proud husband and father of 5 children. I will say tonight that the comments that I'm going to make and the learnings that I would like to share, they're not necessarily limited to mine closure. We can see the same challenges and issues with other large industrial closures, such as oil and gas, power generation, coal facilities, and other types. I'd also like to note that the ideas and concepts that I present tonight are my own, and they don't necessarily reflect those of Turner and Townsend, the organization I work for, the AACE, or any other organization. So these are my own thoughts, and if they're wrong, please don't blame anybody else. So just a quick introduction for people that don't know about Turner and Townsend. Don't want to make this a sales pitch, but just very high level. We are a program and project management firm. We specialize in project controls. We work across all of the natural resources, infrastructure, and real estate sectors. We have just over 7,000 people working in 109 offices in 7 different regions. And really what we provide are services to owner companies on estimating, planning and scheduling, cost management, risk, contracts, and procurement. And then we also do a lot of assurance work, estimate reviews, schedule reviews, project readiness, that kind of thing. And our overall goal within Turner and Townsend is to drive service excellence, transformation, and improvement. And there on the right side of the screen is just a couple of the companies that we are actively doing work for around the world. As governments and regulatory bodies around the world increasingly turn their attention towards mine closure, it's become clear that mine decommissioning and closure cannot just involve the mining company itself. To be successful, it must be a collaborative effort between the mine company, surrounding communities, regulatory agencies, and other partners. Central to success in assessing whether it is possible to create opportunities within the mine area and the completion of post-mining land use viability. Viability. Oh, sorry, I lost my place here. In assessing the site, including what is possible, the existing resources that may be there, and other environmental conditions, also how infrastructure can be repurposed and whatever constraints are at the site, each party is informed and can take up their individual role in determining any opportunities that area. When I say existing resources, I mean, for example, there could be a copper mine that has a gold resource that wasn't pursued, or there may be minerals that are not economically feasible to extract at this time, but as technology increases, it may be available at a future time. As governments and regulatory bodies increasingly turn their attention towards the wider issues associated with mine closure, it has become clear that mine decommissioning cannot just involve the mining company. It must be a collaborative effort between all stakeholders, as I mentioned before. Okay, go to the next page. Come on, go to the next page. So in the course of our work, we did a mine closure survey last year that was done collaboratively between SRK Consulting and Turner and Townsend. And the purpose of that was to get a better understanding of the challenges that mining companies face concerning closure and how companies around the world are addressing these challenges. The campaign included the survey that we'll talk about a little bit today, a white paper, a webinar, and multiple podcasts. This was hosted by Mining Journal, and if you're interested in looking at those, they can be found on their website. The survey received almost 500 responses, which you'll see within the presentation today. So when is the time to plan for closure? Closure is not something that can wait until the end of the asset's life. Planning and pre-closure activities must be integral to the planning, design, construction, and operation of the asset. As shown in the figure, the planning for closure follows the planning for construction of the asset. As the asset moves into construction, the closure plan and estimates are updated to reflect any changes in the construction. Throughout operation, the company should perform progressive reclamation to first, minimize future closure costs. Second, show stakeholders a commitment to returning the site to a predetermined state. Obviously, progressive reclamation must be appropriately planned and executed in such a way as to not hinder or impact future mining operations. Also, during the operations phase, the closure PFS estimate is regularly updated, and we typically see about every 5 years, to reflect any site changes, including what's happening with the progressive reclamation. So as you can see on the figure, and I'm not sure if you can see the mouse moving, but the project starts with the concept and moves forward through all the different phases. The closure planning starts just lags it by 1 or 2 steps and is continuously updated. And obviously, once the operation is complete, then the closure starts, and then the final closeout and turnover of the site. So what are the primary considerations that must be accounted for when planning for mine closure? Well, this presents an ongoing concern for mining companies and the local communities. In our opinion, mine closure planning needs to consider 4 elements in their approach. The first one is site location. As mentioned, understanding what is possible in terms of the current site conditions, how infrastructure can be repurposed, and any site constraints is key. But ultimately, post-closure opportunities are limited by the mine's location and its ability to support post-closure activities. I'll talk a little bit more around these scenarios on the next slide. The second item is regulation. Local and national regulators expect certain conditions to be met according to the legislation and permit conditions. So this is another key factor. How the regulator plans to interpret the regulations may impact the ability to implement other opportunities, which highlights the importance of effective collaboration between all stakeholders from the earliest opportunity. The third consideration is the communities. For small communities, mine closure will result in the loss of major revenue and job source. What does the community want and need? What alternative revenue streams are possible given the site? And what job planning and vocational training will be required to implement these changes? And last, but certainly not least, is cost. Considering all of the wants and needs of multiple stakeholders, the mining company needs to be able to successfully close the mine in a way that enables the revenue opportunities to proceed. But cost will inevitably play a role here. On mine decommissioning and closure projects, both large and small, taking a structured approach in considering each of these elements is essential for closure planning, particularly where the community depends on the mine for employment and other benefits. There have definitely been success stories in mine closures. Our survey respondents overwhelmingly agreed that mine closures can positively transform community infrastructure if properly executed. However, the majority agreed the sector was only somewhat effective at collaborating with communities around closure plans. In fact, 85% of respondents said collaboration was at best somewhat effective. So it is clear that there is still more work to be done here in understanding what the community wants and needs from the site post-closure. So what does the site look like post-closure? In developing the closure plan, the post-closure use must be considered. On this slide, I'm going to look at two different mine closure projects that we have recently worked on and which are adopting two significantly different approaches. The first is a remote mine located in northern Canada. Due to the location, the site offers limited opportunity for post-closure revenue generation. So the ultimate goal is to return the site to its natural state and enable some recreational use. The mining company is leaving some infrastructure in place, such as roads and power lines, which the local community can continue to use to support these activities. They are also providing vocational training for mine employees to redirect their skills to other industries, such as manufacturing, transportation, and construction. The second is a mine that is located near a metropolitan area in the United States. In this case, the site offers a number of revenue-generating opportunities, such as potential water treatment facilities, industrial spaces, alternative energies, such as solar and wind generation, and domestic and hazardous landfills. Each of these uses will allow for continued employment of the existing mine staff as well as others. However, these opportunities come with their own challenges in terms of community expectations. Some stakeholders may wish for the return of the site to its natural state, but this will be delayed indefinitely if it is repurposed for other uses. The expectations and values of the communities may also change over the life of the mine. For example, some mines, and certainly the one I'm working with currently, has been in operation for over a century. So the mining company needs to consistently review and revisit those expectations and update the closure plan to incorporate evolving perspectives. The second consideration is regulatory. Excuse me. Local and national regulators expect certain conditions to be met according to permit conditions. So this is obviously a key factor. How the regulator plans to interpret the regulations may also impact the ability to implement post-closure plans. which highlights the importance of effective collaboration early. However, only 15% of survey respondents believe that the regulatory agencies in their jurisdictions have the capability and/or capacity to adequately manage closure projects. This then puts the burden on the mining companies and the communities to determine and implement closure plans that meet the needs of all stakeholders while complying with local regulations. Excuse me. The third, okay. Let's jump to the next slide here. So what is the role of regulators in mine closure? We have identified 3 primary objectives in mine closure. The first is to return the site to beneficial land use. So that could either be recreation or it could be some post-closure revenue generating opportunities such as I just mentioned. The next is to make the site safe and stable. Obviously, mining companies do not want to be held liable for any injuries or accidents that may occur. Third, that the mine creates no long-term environmental, social, or economic impacts. And that's where the questions come in, is what exactly are those impacts and how long-term do we need to look? How is this done? Regulators need to have clear objectives of mine closure. They need to have detailed requirements for what's included in the mine closure plan. They need to have requirements for financial guarantees. This may include bonds and/or insurances that the mining companies hold in order to secure the funds needed to close the mine. And there needs to be a process for ensuring that the plans that are approved are executed properly. Where the regulators do not have the capability and/or the capacity to meet these objectives, other stakeholders must step in to assist and ensure the mine is properly closed. The third consideration is the surrounding communities. For smaller communities, mine closure will result in the loss of a major revenue and job source. The mining company needs to understand what the community wants and needs, what alternatives are possible given the site, and what job planning, vocational training, or other considerations can be required to implement these changes. When the mining company fails to take into consideration the needs of the other stakeholders, including the community, it may have long-term impacts on the company's ability to continue to operate and also potential reputational damage. Some of these impacts are the license to operate. They may be unable to continue operations in that jurisdiction or others. They'll have less capital for developments or expansions because they're using all of their capital funds to close the mine and meet those expectations. There could be multiple claims and disputes from either contractors, the communities, or the regulators. Obviously, there's delayed revenue opportunities if they're repurposing the site for other uses. If they have a track record of failing to close mines properly, there could be increased bonding requirements. So instead of paying, say, 1% of the mine's value, they may end up paying 5%, which ties up additional capital. There's obviously the reputational damage for any incidents that happen on a closed mine. The inability to meet the green agenda, which is a big thing right now. People really want mining to become more green, more environmentally conscious. And if they aren't doing those things, it definitely impacts the stakeholders. And then there's increased indirect costs if insufficient cash is available. Instead of immediately closing the mine, they may have to put the mine on standby or in care and maintenance for a period of time until the funds become available. That delay in the closure also costs money. The last consideration is cost. Considering all the wants and needs of stakeholders, the mining company needs to be able to successfully close the mine in a way that meets all of these expectations. But cost plays a big part. According to our survey, 92% of respondents reported that mining companies do not set aside enough capital to close an asset. And we've seen that in almost every closure that we've worked with, that the closure costs considerably exceed the expected plan of closure. And in most cases, it can be 100% to 200% more than what the mining company had originally expected. So getting into the actual meat and the potatoes, so to say, of this presentation, what is needed to determine the cost and the schedule of mine closure, and how can we appropriately plan for it? The most important thing in our experience is the overall scope of decommissioning, demolition, and reclamation. If we do not have a clear and defined scope of what is required, what is needed, and what is expected, we will never be able to do a proper job in closing the mine. Second to that is the regulator and stakeholder requirements. We must understand what the regulators are going to require and what the stakeholders are going to want. Obviously, we may not be able to meet all the wants of the stakeholders, but we need to do our best to make them somewhat happy. We need to understand the timelines to perform the closure activities and ongoing environmental monitoring. The ongoing environmental monitoring is often overlooked. Monitoring may take 5 years, it may take 20 years, or it may go on indefinitely. Understanding the requirements is key to producing a proper cost and schedule. The project management approach. There are many there are many contracting strategies that can be used in closing a mine. The most obvious in North America is using an EPCM, an engineering, procurement, and construction management organization. However, there are other options such as an EPC, engineering, procurement, construction, owner-managed teams, or multiple prime contractors. Each of these has their benefits and risks that the mining company must consider when determining the proper contracting strategy. The next one is the availability of resources, supply chain, and execution planning. Mining experts may not necessarily be construction experts. The processes, the equipment, and other approaches are significantly different. So you can't necessarily take a mine truck driver and put them to work driving a bulldozer or even a construction articulated truck. Things are different, and we need to understand what those resources are capable of. The next one is the supply chain. Especially for remote mines, finding the right contractor or contractors to do the work can become a challenge. Remote locations typically do not have mature contracting organizations, so the mobilization costs to bring in other contractors can be significant. This all plays into the overall execution planning of the mine and how that's going to be done. The other item to consider is the cost of bonds and insurances. What are the regulatory agents going to require the mining company to hold aside in order to ensure that the closure takes place? The opportunities for implementing new technologies. As we all know, technology is ever increasing and things become easier and more productive. What we may think is the right thing to do right now can almost definitely change over the next 5 to 10 years. And the last item to consider while looking at the cost and schedule of mine closures is the risks. These could be political, such as regulatory risks. They could be economic, social, technological, or environmental. And I think environmental is a significant risk that we are looking at now as the environmental regulations are continuing to become more stringent. So what challenges are our closure estimating teams facing? Well, we've looked at what variables are required to estimate cost and schedule, and what is required to determine the scope and calculate the company's financial liability to close the mine. But still, as professionals working in this area and in asset development in general, we know there are huge issues with meeting cost and schedule expectations. To provide an accurate estimate of the closure costs, stakeholders will require a robust estimating system that calculates resource and costs accurately. We need to have local, relevant, and current mine closure cost data. We need to have an understanding of benchmarks from other closure projects to be able to check on the reasonableness of the estimate. And at the heart of all this is a project controls and estimating team with expertise in mining and closure projects. It was interesting to me to understand from the survey that 40% of respondents reported their organizations don't have adequate benchmarks to provide confidence in mine closure costs. If mine closure is intended to benefit local communities in a positive way, it is essential to get a true understanding of the cost so that the maximum positive benefit can be realized. We also need to understand that we cannot in any way underestimate the cost of closure. What we typically see is that in the early phases of planning for a new mine, closure costs are looked at very optimistically. People think the closure will just happen as the mine goes along, and at the end, it's just a simple matter of tearing down the building and throwing some seed on the ground. When in reality, closure is just as complicated as erecting the new mine, making sure that you've met all of the requirements in a safe and environmentally friendly way. So in closing on the presentation, we have some successful mine closure requires a structured and consistent approach with involvement from all affected parties. This includes the mining company, regulatory bodies, communities, and other stakeholders. Understanding the future of the site post-closure, the wants and needs of the communities and regulators, the financial obligations of the miner all play into developing a closure plan that produces the desired results. As part of that structured approach, and in conclusion, here are the 7 top tips that we've come up with to improve mine closure. As I just mentioned, be realistic and not optimistic about closure planning. Look at the actual costs, look at the actual work that may have to be done, and account for all of those costs in your closure estimate. Learn from others. Review and use lessons learned from other closure projects from other companies. I know in North America there's a closure committee that includes 7 or 8 different mining companies that are getting together to do lessons learned and look at different ways that they can learn from each other in effective mine closure approaches. Use a risk-based approach in looking at the challenges and opportunities that may be available post-closure. Continually update the closure estimate to account for changes to the mine regulations or community needs. As I mentioned, especially for long-term mines, what with the assumptions at the beginning are more than likely going to be incorrect at the end. Use progressive reclamation to close areas of the mine that are no longer used, thus minimizing the cost at the end. The other great thing about progressive reclamation is it shows the communities and regulators that you care and that you really want to close the mine in an efficient and environmentally friendly manner. And continuously review the regulations and update the plan to account for any changes. I know in North America and specifically the United States, with every change in president, the approach to the environment is slightly different and regulations are consistently changing. And perhaps most importantly, maintain strong relationships with regulators, community partners, as they will ultimately determine if the closure was a success or not. I cannot, excuse me, I cannot emphasize this enough. Some of the issues that we've seen working on closure is that the miner starts to collaborate with these other parties at the very end. And they don't understand what's going to be required, and that drastically impacts the cost that they have set aside for that work. So that's the end of the presentation that I have. We've got about 20 minutes for questions and comments, and I think Mauricio also had a couple of comments that he wanted to make, so we can jump into that.
Thank you very much, Troy. That was a fascinating presentation, and the matter is very and highly current. Everybody's very interested on it. I do think we have had an issue with Mauricio joining, so we don't have him now, at least not yet, as far as I can tell. But we do have a number of questions coming through the YouTube channel.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'm going to start reading some of them. I myself have one question that I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit more from you that's related to that matter, and that is how important, or what level of assurance should a board pursue in regards to the accuracy of cost and risk associated with the closure of a mine project, and you know, considering everything that you said, in addition to the fact that often those mine sites, you know, they're planned for a duration of time, and over time they get expanded, and you know, their exploration period of time get expanded as well. I mean, there's so many things that are going to change, right? So what level of assurance should they pursue? That's what I guess the question I had.
Yeah, for sure. So what I've seen, we do a lot of estimating and assurance and scheduling for new mines. And the thing that I've seen is that the closure piece of that is often not necessarily overlooked, but definitely minimized. It's not important as part of the assurance project in looking at the funding for a new mine. And I think that's where we need to start. Going back to the just see if I can go back here to this first sheet. Sorry, right here. So I think in a lot of cases, the mine closure estimate that's included with the FEL2 pre-feasibility estimates, they don't really matter when they're looking at getting funding to go into the next stage gate. But as we can see from this graph, we really should have a quality closure estimate there, and that's brought before the board and is part of the overall project, and that they look at that as closely as they look at the construction costs. So to me, that's where the assurance starts, is at the very beginning. And that as the project progresses through the stage gates, that closure estimate is as important to the overall cost of the mine as is anything else. And one of the reasons that it becomes less important is because if you look at the net present value of the project, closure is way out at the end. And so bringing that back to today's dollars makes it fairly small. But in reality, if you're not setting aside the right amount of money today, way out at the end of the project, you're not going to have the money to close.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. Okay, so let's go through the questions we have in the audience. I'm just going to read them, right?
Sure.
The first one says, what is the duration of a mining project considered to be too long from economic analysis to mine closure?
So how long is the duration of a mine before it's, can you read that again? I'm trying to.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand it either. It says, what is the duration of a mining project considered to be true from economic analysis, I guess from the beginning, to mine closure?
So if I understand it, it's like how long can a mine be before the closure issue is not important or is wrong. So looking back at the net present value of something, it's typically about 50 years. So if you have a mine that is more than about 50 years old, the closure becomes insignificant in the overall financial analysis. And I think that's where we really run into a problem, is because as you push that money way out and you bring it back to the net present value, it becomes very small, and therefore it's not considered important. And that's why they start to not really look at closure until you're 5 or 10 years away from the closure project, or from the end of the operational life, because that's when you can actually start looking at the money in real terms. But if you've only set aside, say, $1 million for closure, and as you get closer and closer to that, you realize it's $20 million, you may not have the money to do it. So to answer the question, I think it's 50 years. But I don't think the timing should really play a role in that. I think we need to look at it both from a net present value and from a real value on what the closure cost is going to be.
Makes sense. Thanks. Next question. The costs mine closure vary more than a construction project. What is a good variance? Yes, it's a good kind of I think they're looking for a KPI that compares the cost of construction as compared to the cost of closure.
So, I mean, it would vary. It would vary a lot from project to project, because so demolition, for example, is, as a general rule of thumb, is 30% of the construction cost. So if you build a building and it costs $100 million, it's probably going to cost you $30 million to demolish and dispose of it. The problem with closure, or the question that comes in with closure, is not the demolition really, it's all the reclamation work. So it's how much earth moving are you going to have to do, how much seeding, how much planting, that kind of work, and those are all driven by the regulators. So that's the reason early collaboration with the regulators and understanding what they are actually going to be looking for is key, because the big costs come from the unknowns. The demolition is typically a very small portion of the overall closure costs. In our experience, it's 10 to 15%. It's really the other things, and long-term monitoring can cost you a huge amount of money. If you have to monitor that site for 20, 30, 50 years or indefinitely, that can cost a lot of money.
Yeah, excellent, thanks. Go to the next question. So it asks, how with the closure of mines are considered in economic analysis of the project, considering the uncertainties about what will be done in the future, considering the project's life cycle is very long.
So how is closure handled in the financial model? Is that basically what it's asking?
Yeah, I guess, and then specifically where, I think it does translates a preoccupation with the timeline, since it's so far along.
Yeah.
To preview and estimate costs of stuff that's going to happen away from now.
Yeah. So, and that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is because it's so far out, it typically plays a very small role in the overall financial model. and especially for long-term mines. Now, if you have a mine with a 10-year lifespan, it's going to obviously play a bigger role than a mine that's got a 50 or 100-year lifespan, because after 50 years, any costs after 50 years, when you bring them back to net present value, that they become insignificant. So if closure is more than 50 years out, it starts to play a very minor role in the overall financial the financials of the assets. So and so I think that's one of the things I think is that we need to look at not just the net present value of the mine, but we need to look at the full cost of the mine over time to really understand the closure piece. Because if you just look at it from today's dollars, the closure doesn't really matter.
And it looks like we now have Mauricio Lambertucci with us. Mauricio.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Finally, I could get in. Sorry for the misunderstanding. But anyway, nice presentation, Troy. If I might help you with some of the questions, I'm around.
So, Mauricio, Troy mentioned before that you would have some questions or some additional comments you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. In the meanwhile, I was following the presentation through YouTube anyway, and I'm able to see some of the questions in here. I see some very specific and important question that was brought by Vinicius Melo, which is the decommissioning of geotechnical structures like dams and waste piles, if they are part of the mining closure plan. And of course, and sometimes a closure plan can also be designed specifically for this kind of structures, because and we see that very commonly nowadays in Brazil because of mostly the tailing dams situation and the agency of mining that has been policing and controlling better those structures, and some of them increasing the risk, which is making all of the biggest miners to start to decharacterization and also the commission of some structures a part of the mining closure itself. So some other plans dedicated only to these structures are in course, and it should be viewed in a special way, together with the mining closure, but with this special view to be conducted, maybe not at the end of the life of mine, but throughout the life of mine, because we can expect that a tailing dams can't be reason anymore, or you would have to decommission it before to close all the plants. And most of all, we see a movement that also we are changing for filtering plants, and some miners are abandoning the dams, and then it just can be abandoned. You guys can expect that. So all of this should be thought in conjunction with the mining closure. And of course, the challenges are to define in advance which would be the processes and the methods to decommissioning all of those structures, because it's something quite new, even for design engineering companies. So we've been doing this and helping the miners to develop these solutions and also produce more accurate estimates, but also schedules of how to do it and all the methods that are being discussed nowadays. Something to add, Troy, about it?
No, I agree with all of that, Mauricio. No, nothing else to add.
Yeah, this is the point, Felipe, that I'd like to bring as well. I'm really happy that Vinicius brought to this questioning, because it's the point that I'd like to link through all expertise that Troy is bringing, but also our local needs and the local and more recent demands that we have nowadays back in here in Brazil. Are you guys listening to me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. That's it from my side as well.
Was there any other questions?
Felipe?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was talking with my mic muted. I'm so sorry. I was thanking you, Mauricio, and I didn't hear you, and I was in agreement with you. I was just saying that we do have. I mean, it's not only relevant because it's not that hard to understand how relevant it is. We have seen recently the results of poor planning, right? I mean, in Brazil, we have had some issues recently, and it brought the attention to that matter all of a sudden, right? So it has become a real big thing, not only in Brazil, but everywhere across the world, really. We do have another question. It says, what would be the owner's risk if only involving staff that are familiar with the mine operations, but not familiar with the project management, project controls during the closure phase? I think they're more talking about the operationalization of the closure in terms of staffing it.
Yeah, I think the risk there is that the people don't really understand the project side of things. So you may not get the same level of productivity, the same level of expertise that you would get by bringing in somebody that's more project-based than operations-based. The risks could vary from extensive claims, improper cost management, improper schedule management, and actually going into the work, where they just look at, they do things differently. They look at the way the work is approached differently. In operations, things are very linear and just happen very they're very planned. Where in construction, you're constantly dealing with changes, having to move people from one spot to the other. You're just not as productive as you are necessarily in an operational mindset. So I think bringing those operational people in does definitely pose a risk. I'm not saying that it can't be done, and I'm not saying that you should get rid of all your operations people. Specifically for the demolition, you need operations people that know where the pipes are located. Where is the underground stuff located? You need those people to help you. But I think bringing in a construction or project management organization to help with the work is a more risk adverse way of looking at the closure than looking at the operations team to do it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so we are getting close to the full hour. Troy, so thank you very much for being here with us today. It's
Sure.
I don't feel like it's enough time to discuss this matter. I wish we had many more hours to keep going, because it is fascinating, and there's lots to be said about the entire process. But again, thank you so very much for being part of this program today. It was a pleasure having you guys with us. I hope we can meet again sometime soon. And if you have any closing remarks, please go ahead. And with that, we'll close the program for today.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm on LinkedIn. If anybody has any other questions or would like to talk to me about something, I'm happy to answer them. You can just reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'll do my best to get back to you.
Sounds good. Mauricio, any closing remarks?
Okay. Maybe I'll say something in Portuguese as well for the locals. Obrigado, pessoal. Boa noite. Eu deixei no chat o meu contato, meu e-mail aqui do Brasil. Se vocês também tiverem alguma dúvida e quiser tratar ou conversar sobre algum assunto de forma mais detalhada, por favor, façam contato também. Just saying, Troy, that I left my contact and my email in the chat. So if anyone wants to discuss any subject further, can contact me as well, together with you, and we'll be happy to respond to anything.
Excellent. Thank you, Mauricio.
All right. Again, on behalf of the CE Brazil section, thank you so much for you guys for joining us. Thank you, everybody who joined us tonight. And I hope to see you in the next program in about a month's time. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Bye.